on the integrity and the ability of the individuals in the key posts in the public service. Judges, central bankers, the accountant general, the commissioner of police, the people who head our stat boards, who sit on our stat board, key stat boards, the people who manage our reserves. Once corrupt persons get into key positions, that's the end. It's not only the end because they take money and help themselves, because you can stop that and put them in jail. It's the end because they subvert and corrupt the system and make it impossible to root out the cancer, which then becomes entrenched throughout the system. The system is permanently broken. You look at other countries. President SBY, President Yudhoyono of Indonesia, used to lament publicly about the problem he had with what he called the judicial mafia. He doesn't mean the mafia on the streets. He means judges whom he could not trust for their integrity because they had become corrupt and they had become part of the problem. You look at other countries where the police are in cahoots with the crooks.
Yeah,
And if you have a problem, you're not sure whether you should go to the police station or run away from the police station.
The Attorney General said that Najib is done no wrong.
Or you look at countries where those responsible for safeguarding state assets instead raid the bank. As the Malay proverb goes, pagar makan padi. You are the hedge, but you are eating the rice, which you are supposed to protect. To prevent this, or at least to make this harder, this system needs a second key. And the challenge is for us how to ensure this second key strengthens and stabilizes our system of government. Which is what we have today. Where did it come from? Part of the provisions from the state constitution, part of the provisions from Malaysia's federal constitution, which we adopted and incorporated, plus amendments which we made after separation. For example, amendments to safeguard our sovereignty and to ensure that any decision to give up our sovereignty would have to be put to a referendum of all of the voters in Singapore and not decided by the legislature. It's a rojak. It's a messy document, and such a messy document that in 1970, Ms. Lee asked the British High Commissioner to get British constitutional law experts to polish it. And it came back polished and shiny. And Ms. Lee thought that the British experts had done a first-rate job. The idea was, you look at the American Constitution, it's lasted 200-something years, and over these 200-something years, it's only had 20-plus amendments, and so it's, you worship it. You get it precisely right, beautiful form of words, every school child knows it, and that's what is going to guide the country for the next several hundred years. But in the end, Mr. Lee decided not to take that approach. He did not take in the brand new versions drafted by the British FCO office experts in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, because he concluded that the experts had not understood the context, nor why we had made certain basic decisions. He explained this to the House in 1984, when he moved the constitutional amendments to create the CMP scheme. And he used Thomas Jefferson's analogy of a suit. He said, from my experience, constitutions have to be custom-made, tailored to suit the peculiarities of the person wearing the suit. Perhaps, and he changes his metaphor here, but I think you will forgive him this mixed metaphor. Like shoes, the older they are, the better they fit. Stretch them, soften them, resole them, repair them. They are always better than a brand new pair of shoes. Our people have got used to and understand the present system, he said. It takes a long time. Any fundamental change takes a long time. But most important of all, the Constitution works. Many countries have tried and gone through several constitutions since independence. They have not brought stability or legitimacy. I believe it is better to stretch and ease an old shoe when we know that the different shape and fit of a younger generation requires a change. Like many of Mr. Lee's speeches, this speech made in 1984 in this house, or in the old Parliament House, is still worth reading more than 30 years later. Sunday Times published an excerpt. I encourage you to read it, and I urge members to read the full version in the Hansard. And apart from talking about Singapore politics, he gave a tour of the horizon of how historically other countries, Britain, France, America, have each got their own histories and how the system evolved for them, and how difficult it was. And he talked about France and how, as a young man in 1956, after attending a constitutional conference in London, he took a side trip to Paris on the way home, and the taxi driver took him around, showed him the sights, brought him to the National Assembly. This was 1956, and it was a democracy, and the politicians couldn't agree. And the taxi driver pointed at the National Assembly and said to him, "Walla, walla, walla." And he said that was an education for a young politician into the reality of politics. Unfortunately, Hansard didn't quite catch the nuance of this expression, and Hansard, I just recently noticed, transcribed it as V-O-I-L-A 3 times, as a result of which it made no sense, and you therefore won't find this in the Sunday Times, because Sunday Times couldn't make sense of it and edited it out. But it's the most vivid example of how things can go wrong in politics. Highly civilized nation, system didn't work in the end. General de Gaulle had to come back out of retirement and change the rules, took very stern measures, created the Fifth Republic. But even de Gaulle must die, and till today, the French, they also, like other countries, have political problems. Today, in the newspapers, if you read the Straits Times, Paris is in upheaval because there are strikes. Who's on strike? Taxi drivers, air traffic controllers, and for good measure, civil servants are on strike. So, I think we have to understand the difference between the theory and the practice, and what looks good on paper and what we need really truly for in real life to do. This is not masa-masa. The approach which we have taken has been to evolve our political system as we go along. Mr. Lee did this, we've continued to do this. Learning from experience, stretching and easing the old shoe, and adapting it to our needs and dealing with problems as new problems emerge as we understand the difficulties and the weaknesses. For example, we inherited a first-past-the-post parliamentary system modeled on the British House of Commons in Westminster. We've kept the first-past-the-post system. That's why here we sit opposite one another, the government and in principle the opposition on the other side. We don't sit in a semicircle the way the Americans sit in a semicircle, or the European legislature sit in a semicircle. It's a parliamentary system, first past the post. You are in opposition to each other. We kept that system, but subsequently we introduced new institutions, non-constituency MPs, nominated MPs, group representation constituencies, and an institution of an elected president. Each institution with a purpose, each one in line with our principles.
Asia's infrastructure spending will reach $5 trillion a year by 2025. Does the region have the money and political muscle to build all the massive infrastructure projects it needs in time? Channel News Asia talks to the big Asian players in a special panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Great Race, Asia's Infrastructure, Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on Channel News Asia.
first past the post-parliamentary system tends to produce clear election outcomes. You either win decisively or you lose decisively. And especially in Singapore, where every constituency is more or less the same composition and the same mood as every other constituency, all the more you tend to have a national swing and it goes across the board, and so you end up with a clear majority in the House. After independence, after separation, the Barisan Sosialis opposition walked out of Parliament in 1965. From then, Parliament was composed entirely of PAP MPs. In the next 4 general elections, the PAP won all the seats, and as well as all the by-elections in between, the PAP won all of them. And this enabled the government to govern decisively and effectively in the vital first years of nationhood. It lasted from 1965 until 1981, when the first opposition MP, J.B. Jeyaretnam, was elected to Parliament. It had been by then 16 years since separation. A new generation of voters was coming of age. A new team of MPs and ministers was preparing to take over. Mr. Lee and his senior colleagues watched what happened in the House after Jeyaretnam came in. And after some time, they concluded, to their surprise, that despite all the toing and froing and unpleasantness, that it was good for the government and it was good for the Singapore system that we have opposition voices in Parliament. Because the opposition could express opposing views, could question and criticize the government, could make ministers justify their actions. And the opposition provided Mr. Lee and his team the foil or backdrop against which they could set out their ideas more clearly, in contrast to what was being presented on the other side. Right against wrong, good ideas against better ones. And through the debate in Parliament, help Mr. Lee and his team get their message across and aid public understanding. So Mr. Lee proposed the NCMP scheme in 1984. The NCMP scheme made sure that whatever the election outcome, there would always be a certain minimum number, at least, of opposition MPs in Parliament. And at first, this minimum was 3 opposition MPs, either elected or if not elected, NCMPs, or some combination. And over time, we've gradually increased it and we've brought it now to 9. The design of the NCMP scheme is unique, I think. But the concept of a parliament with members who have been elected in different ways is not at all unusual. Many countries do that. Look at New Zealand, look at Taiwan. They have mixed member proportional representation systems. Some MPs are elected from constituencies. Others are chosen from party lists. And the party list, in other words, is a proportional representation system. How many you take off the party list depends on the proportion of the total vote that your party got. And one reason the New Zealanders do this is because they want to ensure that there is Maori representation in Parliament. Such a system where you top up beyond what the first past the post system gives you will help to moderate the extreme outcomes of a first past the post system. And that's why we did the NCMP system. We didn't do the proportional representation way because we felt that would be bad for Singapore. It would result in political parties that are based on race or religion. It would encourage political leaders to champion the demands of their particular segment against the broader interests of Singapore. It would divide us rather than bringing us together. Because to win in a proportional representation system, you've got to have your base. What is your base? It can be Christians, it can be Buddhists, it can be Muslims, it can be Indians. It can be a special interest group, maybe on gender issues. What is your interest? Your interest is to consolidate that base, take a hard position, demand as much as you can for your group. then you increase the percentage. You don't have to win seats, you just get higher percentage and you will get seats in parliament. You don't have to win constituencies. And I think if you do that, you end up split, you end up polarized, you end up severely weakened. Instead, we created the NCMP scheme. And NCMPs are opposition candidates who had the best results but didn't quite win their seats. In fact, some NCMPs have higher percentage, if you look at it on a personal basis, than other people, MPs elected in GRCs, if you just count their chunk of the GRC and how many votes they got in percentage. The NCMP may have got more than the person from a GRC. But the point is, he did well. He was one of the best losers, and they came in ensuring that opposition voices are always represented in parliament. And they have at least as much right to be in parliament as MPs who are elected on a party list under a proportional representation system. In fact, arguably more, because on a party list under proportional representation, no voter specifically chose you. Your party boss put you on the list in position number 2 or 3 or 20, and you happen to make the cut. Here, to be an NCMP, the voters in the constituency which you contested have to have a sufficiently high regard of you to give you one of the highest votes amongst all losing candidates before you can come in. So you have got people who are really, truly, personally voting for you. And I think that gives legitimacy as well as objectivity to the system. It depends on electoral contests and not just on the say-so of the party they belong to or the party bosses of the party they belong to. So we introduced the NCMP scheme in 1984. In 1990, we introduced a nominated MP scheme to bring into parliament diverse voices from civil society. So that now, if you take elected opposition MPs, NCMPs, plus NMPs together, then altogether about 20% of the MPs in the House will at all times be not government MPs. So there's diversity, there's debate, I think there is value. The NCMP scheme is a good one which has achieved its purpose. In the last 30 years, other than the very first time in 1984 when there were special circumstances, opposition parties have always taken up the NCMP seats offered to them. For example, Ms. Sylvia Lim was first elected as an NCMP in 2006, and she acquitted herself in Parliament, impressed voters, and became an MP elected in Aljunied GRC in 2011. And in the last term, we had 3 NCMPs, Ms. Lina Chiang, Mr. Yee Jen Jong, and Mr. Gerald Giang. They all took up their seats. They participated actively in parliamentary debates. And this term, Workers' Party NCMPs have also taken up their seats. We have Mr. Leon Pereira, we have Mr. Dennis Tan. They made their maiden speeches this week. Except for Ms. Lee Li Lian, who has said she will not take up her NCMP seat, but she is not taking it up, not out of any objections of principle, but to give it to another Workers' Party candidate. Now, whether that's in the spirit of the scheme, we can debate, but we will wait for the motion, which I believe Mr. Loh has moved to discuss the matter further. The opposition, of course, would like to have it both ways. Take up NCMP seats when they win them, but also protest that an NCMP is a second-class MP in order to persuade voters to cast their votes for them and make them constituency MPs. In fact, in reality, NCMPs have exactly the same opportunities to question, to speak, and to debate in Parliament that constituency MPs have. They can file PQs, they can move motions, they can speak in all debates, they can show voters, past and future, what they can do. There's just one distinction between an NCMP and a constituency MP today. And that is, unlike constituency MPs, NCMPs are restricted in what they can vote on in Parliament. There are a few matters which they cannot vote on. Constitutional changes, supply bills, money bills, votes of no confidence, and also removing a president from office. This was how the scheme was designed by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew back in 1984. And he had his reasons, which he explained in an exchange because Mr. Jeyaretnam was in the Parliament and challenged him on this. I suppose this is an example of how Mr. Jeyaretnam and the opposition played a constructive role. Mr. Lee was particularly concerned with one scenario, a split in the ruling party leading to a motion of no confidence in the House. And he felt that in such a situation, NCMPs should not have a say in determining the government. I think there's a context to this. 1984, Mr. Lee would have still had fresh in his mind the memory of what had happened in 1961, when the extreme left wing split off from the PAP and formed the Barisan Sosialis. And the PAP hung on in the Legislative Assembly with a one-vote majority, one-seat majority. And then one MP died and there was level, no-seat majority. I think Mr. Lee must also have been conscious that even in 1984, within the PAP, there was opposition to the pace of leadership renewal, which could have led to a leadership challenge. The amendments were moved, I think, around August 1984. The general election was upcoming and took place in December 1984. And it was a crucial general election because many of the third generation leaders entered politics in that election. Wong Kan Seng, Yeo Cheow Tong, Ma Bao Tan, Abdullah Tarmuji, myself. And there were very strong different views within the PAP on whether this was going too fast, and it was not to be ruled out that there could have been a challenge. And Mr. Lee felt in that situation, NCMPs should not have a say. But after 30 years, in a different phase of our political development, we should re-examine this. I'm not saying that we can now rule out the possibility of leadership challenge within the ruling party. We can never rule that out. I have a cohesive team, but as Mr. Lee said, it is a real distinct possibility because strong men have strong views and they can collide. And in other countries it happens regularly. In Australia, in UK, it's marvelous theatre. Suddenly you hear news, there's going to be a spill. The Australians call it a spill. A spill means somebody has mounted a challenge. The leader then has to call his MPs together to vote. It happens within 24 hours. Ministers take positions, MPs take positions, furious toing and froing. Next thing you know, new Prime Minister and I'm writing a new letter of congratulation. It's happened 3-4 times within the last 5 years in Australia. And in Britain, leadership challenges are also dramatic events. Mrs. Thatcher was challenged and deposed. Tony Blair left because he knew if he didn't leave, somebody will challenge him and he will be pushed out. So we cannot rule out it happening in Singapore. But if we accept that NCMPs have as much of a mandate from voters to be in the House as constituency MPs, and more mandate in the House than party list MPs would in a proportional representation system, then I think even in the case of a vote of no confidence and the other restricted matters which NCMPs presently are not allowed to vote on, I think we can make a case, and I will make the case, that they should not only be allowed to speak, but to vote. Therefore, I intend to amend the Constitution during this term to give NCMPs the same voting rights as constituency MPs. NCMPs should therefore be able to vote even in the case of confidence motions and all the other presently restricted matters. And they will be equal in powers, although not in responsibility and scope, to constituency MPs, because they are non-constituency and they do not have specific voters to look after. But there will be no reason at all to perceive NCMPs as being second class. I will also increase the minimum number of opposition MPs, including NCMPs, in this House from the next general election. I will increase the number from 9 to 12. Given that in any election, at least 30% of voters will vote against the government, ensuring a minimum of 12 opposition MPs in the House of about 100 members, I feel is reasonable. The opposition often claims that they are unable to put up a stronger showing in Parliament because they have too few MPs. I think this is an excuse, because the opposition's impact depends on the quality of the opposition MPs and arguments far more than on their number. But having more NCMPs will give the opposition more opportunity to show what they can do, and if in fact the NCMPs are capable and effective, the exposure will win them recognition and help them win a constituency the next time. We will also continue with the NMP scheme. So together with the NCMPs, 12 plus 9, we'll now have at least 21 non-ruling MPs in the House.